Today's topic is Marketo MCP in 15, and we're going to be starting from the ground up by explaining what Model Context Protocol is, and then we're going to be setting up a plug and play template to create a Marketo MCP server that will allow us to build a personal Marketo assistant, as well as give AI agents access to over 40 different Marketo tools. Let's start nice and easy by first defining what Model Context Protocol is. It's simply a standard that allows AI agents and LLMs to access and use external data and tools. The way it's used in practice is that an MCP server is created. Don't be intimidated by the word server. Server is just any computer that is running code, whether it's my laptop here or whether it's a server in a data center somewhere running in Ireland. All it is just a laptop running a programming script. So we have an MCP server, and it acts as a middleman, and it translates the desired actions of our AI agent into API requests to carry out the desired actions in the different downstream platforms such as Marketo, Salesforce, and Gmail. And this second diagram shows it in more detail, where the AI agent makes a request to our MCP server using Model Context Protocol, and then this MCP tool request gets translated to an API request to carry out those actions in our Marketo instance. So I want to first show you what we can do with MCP before we dive further on into how this is set up. So let's first of all go to Claude desktop, where I've got this Marketo MCP server. Whoa, that was weird. So if I go to my Claude desktop, I've got this Marketo MCP server configured with all of these 40 different actions. So now if I go to create a chat, I can make sure that this Marketo MCP connector is enabled. So if I want to ask it, please find the lead ID for pretord@tcd.ie, it's going to search what tools it has available. It's going to ask me for permission here to search for the lead. It's going to carry out that request, and then it returns the lead ID. So this is one example of how we can use the Marketo MCP is to build a personal assistant in Claude desktop. Another example is we can use it in OpenAI. So for example, we can build an ICP scoring agent that has access to our Marketo server with all of these actions. So if we need to pull up fields about the person in Marketo to learn more about them, we can do that using the Marketo MCP server. And then this AI agent can make a decision based on everything it can find about the person in Marketo, like what web pages they're visiting, what industry they're in, how many employees in their company, etc. It can take all that information into account and make its decision about whether this person matches your company's ICP. And just to show you another demonstration here, so I've got another very simple one where I just say you are a helpful Marketo assistant. We've got all of our MCP tool calls configured again. And then let's just say, please tell me what channels I have in Marketo. So this is just a demo here. One reason I really like OpenAI is because of this testing interface you have right here. So you can define your prompt, you can connect your MCP, you can connect web search, you can connect a knowledge base, and then you can test the prompt and the agent's response right here. Okay, so now I've gotten all my channels back from Marketo here. So this is just a very quick demo, but obviously you can build much more elegant and useful AI agents, such as an ICP scoring agent. You can build a duplicate merging agent, or you could build a lead routing agent, for example. And then the third and final example that I wanted to show you guys is building a Slack MQL triaging agent. So if a lead gets MQL'd, we can build an AI agent that we can ask questions of. So we can say, hey, at RevOpsBot, why did this lead MQL? And then it will look up the lead's activity history in the past 7 days and return all of that information. And the way this is set up is we'll have a listener server that will pass messages between the user in Slack and an AI brain. And then the AI brain will decide whether it needs to use the MCP server to carry out actions in these downstream platforms, or whether it needs to communicate the user to gather more information or to confirm that certain actions were taken. So that's another use case that you can use model context protocol. That's another use case that you can use model context protocol in. So now that I've shown you how we can use it in Claude Desktop, OpenAI, and now also Slack, I now want to dive into, well, not dive into yet. I just want to show you what I mean by a plug and play template and how easy this is to set up. You will need to know how to program using a large language model as your coding partner. But besides this, I've made it as easy as possible for you to get started. And I'll show you exactly what I mean by that. So I've got this template here on Replit. So all you have to do is click remix this app. You can also leave it as Marketo MCP. Set it as private here, so only you can see and edit this app. And then go remix app. It's remixing at the moment. One of the things you'll need to do is you will need to enter your Marketo API credentials in order for the MCP server to work. So I'm going to pause the screen here while I do that. So I've got my Marketo client credentials set up here. So then now all I'm going to do is press the publish button. The name Marketo MCP is fine for my Replit URL. And then all we need to do here is just hit publish. And I'm just going to pause the video again while this is building. So now my app has been built and deployed. We just need to copy this URL here. And now to test that it works, I'm in OpenAI again, and I've got a very simple prompt here saying your job is to be a helpful Marketo personal assistant. Let's add this MCP server. And we need to add the /MCP so that we go to the correct destination on our MCP server. Then let's call this Marketo MCP. We don't have any access token set up at the moment, but later on in this video I'm going to show you how we can set up authentication for our MCP URL so that only we can use the Marketo MCP. So let's hit connect here. We've got all our Marketo activities ready to go. Let's go add. And then let's test it out. Please tell me what you can find out about. So you see what I mean by plug and play. You didn't have to make any changes to the code. So hold on. First it's asking to get lead by email. So it's going to try and find out all the Marketo information about this person from their email address. And what I really like about OpenAI as well is that it shows you all the thought process. It shows you the thought process that the AI agent goes through as it's making all its decisions. And it says, I could look into different types of activities, possibly focusing on recent lead activities by email and any changes to the leads themselves. It might be helpful to gather some relevant IDs for these activities. I also have the option to use something like get activity types to streamline this process. Let's see how this unfolds. So that's one reason I really like building in OpenAI's playground, is because you get to see all of the tool calls being made and how it's making all of the tool calls. And you get to see the results of all the tool calls. So this is what came back from Marketo when we made the request to look up this email address. So let's approve this. It's going to try and get all the activity types we have in Marketo. Okay, so let's see what activity types we got back. Yeah, so we can see all the activity types along with their IDs got returned here. It's just a very, very long payload to look at. And now it's looking at the describe leads endpoint to see what it can find out, to see what fields we have in the lead basically. That's what the describe leads endpoint does. So I'll let that keep going. Okay, so now it's going to get these lead activities by email. So it's going to try and get all of the activity history for these activities for this email address. So let's approve. So while it's doing that, I just want, okay, that's going 365 days back. Wow, that's going to take a while. But I'm just going to stop this here because you get the idea. At the end of this, it would give me a summary based on all this person's activity and maybe based on some fields that it found when doing the lookup by email address. It would summarize all that for me and return it. But for the sake of brevity, I'm going to move on with the rest of the demo. But this is what I mean by a plug and play template. Literally all you had to do was just enter your Marketo secrets, and then you just had to hit publish, and that was it. There was no changes needed to the code and no other setup needed. It's as easy as that. And I also want to show you how easy it is to run this locally on your laptop if you want to. So let's go to Cursor is my integrated development environment of choice. So we're going to create we're going to clone a GitHub repo. So if we go back to our blog post, I'm just going to open up one of these links and go, go here, Marketo MCP. We're going to copy this URL. So I want to show you how easy it is to get this running on your own laptop as well. We'll talk about when you can run this on your laptop versus when you need to host it somewhere like Replit later on in the video, so stay tuned for that. Sorry, clone repo, let's go. Clone from URL. And then it's asking me where I want to create this. So I'm going to create it here. We're going to open it. Okay, so I really recommend paying for a version of Cursor, PyCharm, or Visual Studios that has the AI agent built in on the right hand side. But for me, I use Claude in the terminal as my personal assistant. So I'm going to ask it here, please set up a virtual environment and install all the libraries from requirements.txt. So while Claude's working away at this, I just want to say that it might seem intimidating what I'm doing there in Cursor and in the terminal, and it might be a bit new to you working with a large language model as your coding partner, but I just wanted to point out that I do have a Python for RevOps crash course, which will give you the programming terminology you need to communicate effectively with a large language model as you go about writing, testing, debugging, and then deploying code. So if you find yourself struggling with the stuff that I'm going through in this demo video, then you can check out that course to see how you can start working with an LLM to do all the stuff I'm going to show you later on in this video. Okay, so Claude's going to keep working through this. It's created the virtual environment, and Cursor here is asking me, do I want to select this new virtual environment as my workspace folder? I'm going to say yes. So now Claude is installing all the libraries we need from requirements.txt. There's only 3 of them. Okay, so it's done that now. So let's go and we're going to run our MCP server.py. But what we're going to need to do actually first before that I forgot is we're going to need to create a .n file with all our Marketo credentials. So I'm going to pause the video while I create that. I've created my .n file over here. I'm not going to open it up because I don't want to expose my secrets, but it looks the exact same as this. And I'm just actually going to restart my MCP server now that I've filled out all the necessary secrets. So I'm restarting this, and then the only other thing we need to do, so we can see that our MCP server is running on port 8000. We just need to do one more thing. Okay, and I'll explain what I'm doing here later on in the video. Just bear with me. I first just want to show you how quickly you can get this up and running, and then later on I'll explain all the steps I'm going through here so it makes more sense for you. But let's copy this. So now it's running, and I'm just going to go, let's go here, and I'm going to add a new MCP server, and then I need to put the .mcp later on. Let's call it Marketo MCP, no access token. Let's go connect. And we can see all of our tool calls are ready to go. We're connected to this MCP server that we just set up here. And if you want proof it works, let's just say, let's clear the chat and say, find me the 10 most recently created emails, and let's see how it gets on with this. Okay, so it's going to use the browse emails. Okay, so it's making multiple browse email requests. So it's explaining its reasoning here, and it's trying to make the request again, but again, for the sake of brevity, we know it's working. It's able to successfully make these browse email requests to Marketo. I can see it's returned one of the emails at least. So we know the MCP server that we just have running here locally on my laptop is working, and that's all I wanted to show you guys. So we're 18 minutes into the video now. So we're not quite Marketo MCP in 15, but we're very close because we had Replit deployed much earlier than this, and that just took a few clicks. And then deploying it here on our laptop was a bit more involved, but I'm going to explain now the steps I carried out so it will make more sense to you. But we basically deployed twice in 18 minutes, which I think is pretty good. So now that I've showed you some use cases that will hopefully get you excited and see why building a Marketo MCP is valuable, and I've showed you how plug and play the template is, let's dive a bit into how it's actually set up. So in the MCP server.py script, sorry, I just paused the video there because I needed to update this because we have two of them. The only difference between these two Python scripts is that this MCP server doesn't have authentication built in. So that means that once anyone has the URL, they can start using the Marketo MCP tools. But this script, someone needs to enter a token or API key before they can start using the URL, which gives us more protection. But the way that this works, both these MCP servers are set up the exact same way, where we use the fast MCP library, and all we do is that we are putting wrappers around our Marketo functions. And each of these wrappers has a description for the AI agent. to let it know when it should use this tool. So the get activity types tool, it lets the AI agent know that this gets available activity types from Marketo. And then all this does is simply call the get activity types Marketo function that we have and returns the result. So this is what I mean by the fast MCP wrapper is all of this. It's just a wrapper around our Marketo functions, and it gives the AI a description of how to use this tool. So the MCP server and MCP server auth are set up the exact same way, where we've got all these wrappers around our Marketo functions. And then the only difference between the two is that the server auth has some extra code up here to make sure that we're checking authentication before allowing someone to use the MCP. And again, if you want any of this explained to you in more detail, you can always talk to your AI agent and they'll be able to explain it in more detail for you. So I could ask Claude here, please explain, these particular lines of code to me, and it will do it. So, as I just mentioned, when we have these wrappers around our Marketo functions, whenever the MCP makes a request to the MCP server to call a particular tool, the MCP server will then call the corresponding Marketo function, and that Marketo function will make the necessary API request to carry out that action in Marketo. And as you can guess, the Marketo API is a crucial underpinning of a Marketo MCP server. If you're unfamiliar with the Marketo API, then you should check out the Marketo API crash course, which will teach you how to make your first Marketo API requests in Postman, then transitioning to making them in Python code. And it'll also walk you through over 100 different Marketo API requests and show you how to use all of them. So check out the Marketo API crash course if you need an introduction to the Marketo API. And then, as I already said, each time the AI agent calls an MCP tool call, this then calls the corresponding Marketo function, which then makes the necessary Marketo API request. So let's see what the Marketo functions.py script looks like. Sorry, wrong one. It's this one. So we read in all our API credentials. This is the function to get our Marketo token to give us the necessary permission to make subsequent API calls. And then we have Marketo functions defined for everything from our activity functions to our lead functions, like looking up a lead, the describe leads endpoint to see all the fields that exist on leads in our Marketo instance. We've got email functions, channel functions, folder functions, smart campaign functions, and program functions. There's probably even more than that. Token management functions, yeah. So basically, when a Marketo function gets called here, the script then goes into Marketo functions and calls the corresponding Marketo function, and then the Marketo function makes the necessary API request to carry out that action. And if you need help getting your Marketo API keys, you can follow this guide, which will show you how to get them. And again, if you're stuck and you don't know how to create an API user, hopefully you have an API user in your Marketo account already, but if you don't, then you'll need to create an API user first, so you can use the docs to do that. Or if you want a more gentle introduction, as I mentioned before, the Marketo API crash course is a good gentle introduction to using the Marketo API. Okay. We've already done some of these steps already, and I'll just show you. This is the landing page for the Python for RevOps crash course. So if you're struggling with any of the programming we're doing later on in this video, be sure to check this out. These are all the things that we cover in the Python course. Okay, so we went through this already. You'll need an IDE like Cursor or PyCharm or Visual Studios, and then I recommend paying more to get one with the AI assistant embedded in the IDE so that it has access to the project files and it can make changes on your behalf to all of those files. So the first thing we need to do, and you can follow these instructions, or you can give the README. You can just give this GitHub repository to your AI agent and ask it to follow the instructions, and it will know how to set it up on your behalf. But basically, we walk through these steps at the beginning of the video. We need to clone the repository. We need to create a virtual environment and install the dependencies. We need to set up our Marketo credentials. And we need to start the server. And one thing that's missing here that I'll add in later on is we also need to specify our authentication token. So that's this. We also need to specify our MCP API key. And then, yeah, we just run the MCP server.py where there's no authentication needed. And as we'll see later on, we need this for Claude Desktop. And then we've got the MCP server auth.py where someone needs to authenticate before using this MCP server. And then we've just got a list of all the available tools we have down here in a more easily digestible format than scrolling through the Python script. And then it also explains all the test scripts, which I'm going to go through a bit later on. So this is how we set up our MCP server, as we saw earlier on in the video. And now I'm going to explain what I was doing. Let's open this up. I'm going to explain what I was doing here with Ngrok. So you'll see I typed in the command Ngrok HTTP 8000 and then all of this stuff appeared. So Ngrok, it's called a tunneling service. And when we run the MCP server, it's running on a local port on our laptop. So in this case, the MCP is running on port 8000 here. It might be hard for you to see. Wow. Yeah. So it's running on port 8000 here locally on our laptop. But in order for Claude Desktop, OpenAI, or any AI agent to be able to access our local MCP server, it needs to be exposed to the public internet. So we use Ngrok to expose the local port 8000 on our laptop to the internet so that OpenAI and other AI platforms will be able to see it. So the command for doing that is just Ngrok HTTP 8000. So if we're running our MCP server locally on port 8000, then we just need to run Ngrok HTTP 8000, and then that port 8000 is going to be exposed to the public internet so that our AI agents can see it. So that's why when I'm setting this up in OpenAI, it's this URL that's publicly accessible on the internet. And when the AI agent queries this URL, it forwards it to the local port 8000 on our laptop. So that's why instead of me copying this URL, I'm going to copy this URL when I go to OpenAI. So if I go here, or actually if I go here, it's the Ngrok URL that I'm putting in here. Because when we go to this destination, Ngrok will forward all the queries to this URL to port 8000 on our laptop. So hopefully that makes more sense now about what I was doing with Ngrok earlier on. And now let's talk about how we can test our Marketo functions. And once we know the Marketo functions are working correctly and we know we can authenticate and we can successfully make Marketo API requests, how we can then test that we can make our MCP tool calls correctly. Okay, and there are three different types of tests. So whether we're calling the test Marketo functions or the test MCP server functions, There are 3 tests available: read-only tests, which are safe. There are no modifications made to our Marketo instance. There are write-only tests, which can do creates, updates, or clones. And there are prompts sometimes before it does things like scheduling a batch campaign or requesting a campaign to act on a lead. And it does offer the ability to clean up all the assets that were created during testing at the end. I'll show you what that looks like. And then full test runs both the read-only tests followed by the write-only tests. The first thing we need to do is we need to create some test assets that these test scripts will be able to modify safely. So if we go into Marketo, these test assets are a test folder, a test email program, a test batch campaign, a test email, a test request campaign, and a test trigger campaign. And one thing I will point out is that, let me navigate to this quickly, hold on. Okay, one thing we need to point out is that we need to turn on our request campaign first. So once we've made it, this is just a very simple campaign. Campaign is requested, I put in a particular email address to filter on so that it only acts on a single lead. All it does is changing the person's score by 5. And then just make sure you turn this on so that we're ready to start using it for testing, because if it's not turned on, then the test will fail, because we can only request the campaign via API and via tool call if it's actually on. And then the second thing we need to do for testing is, if we want the test to schedule this email program, or if we want the test to approve this email program to be successful, we need to set the send date to be sometime in the future. So I'm just going to say, let's say the 27th of March, 8 a.m. So now that the send date is sometime in the future, when the MCP server tries to call the tool to approve this program, it will work. So these are our Marketo test assets that we needed to create. And the first thing we're going to do is call our read tests for our Marketo functions. So let's go and do that. So I can turn Ngrok off for the moment. And I can also turn this off for the moment. I'm going to create a new terminal. Actually, there's a simpler way to do this. Let's just go to, it's Marketo functions. No, it's test Marketo functions.py that we want to run first. So let me go run Python file. So you can see here it's asking me, do we want to do read-only tests, write-only tests, or full tests? I just paused the video to zoom in there. So let's do the read-only tests first. So we can see it's passing through them here. It's doing things like browsing emails. It's finding all the channels we have. It's looking for the program members schema. It's getting emails. And now it's asking me for a test email address to do a lead lookup. So I'm just going to enter the same one as before. Okay, so I was able to find the lead and that ID. And then I think it's trying to get the activity history for this lead at the moment, which it always takes a little while when you do the activity history request. And that could be one thing if you're getting issues with the MCP, because the get activity history can take a while, especially if you're looking over a long time frame, like 30 days or 60 days. So if you're getting issues with that tool call failing, it's just because the Marketo API is taking a long time to return all of that activity history. So we can see now that all 23 of our tests passed successfully. So the next thing we're going to do is the write tests. So let's just run this again. And this time we're going to do the write-only tests. And one thing I want to point out is that once we ran the read tests and we entered the email address, this email address gets stored in the test config.json, so that if we rerun any of the tests later on, we don't need to re-enter this test email because it's already saved. And we'll see that again where when we enter test variables here in the write test, they will get saved here for future use. So let's do the write tests now. So the folder name to create the test assets in. So that's all of these assets we just created here. So MCP test folder, test email program, test batch campaign, etc. So I'm just going to enter all of these off video for a second. Once I've entered the MCP test folder, it's asking me, because later on we're going to create a program using a tool call, it's asking me what program type do we want to be created. So I'm just going to say, let's create a default program. And now it's saying, okay, you want to create a default program. What channel do you want for that program? And it's showing me all the available channels I have in my Marketo instance. So the program channel to be created, let's say we're just going to make this operational. And then I'm going to enter the rest of these things. It's asking for the trigger campaign name. So that's going to be this one, MCP test trigger campaign. And I'll enter the rest off screen. So I entered all the information here. And we can see that all of these things that I've entered, it's looked up the ID for all the assets. So if I enter MCP test trigger campaign, it looks up that name and then it saves the ID for future use. So later on, when it knows it needs to use this campaign, it can reference it by its ID. And we can see it's already started to do some of the actions. It's created a smart campaign called MCP test campaign. So let's check that out in Marketo. So we can see it's created these two, MCP test campaign clone, and it's after updating it by changing the name here. And it's saying schedule batch campaign. This will schedule the batch campaign to run. So where's the batch campaign at the moment? Here's the batch campaign. Schedule. So we can see it was last run March 1st. So if we say yes, okay, so it's scheduled this to run. So if I refresh this, it's probably going to run in 5 minutes. Yeah, scheduled runs March 6th in 5 minutes basically. And if you don't want this to run, you could X out here, but this smart campaign is pretty harmless, so it's okay for it to run. It's just changing my test lead score by 5. So make sure that these are all pretty harmless so that if they do run, there's no consequences. Okay, so now this will trigger the request campaign for the lead. Let's say yes. Okay, now it's proceeding with the rest of them. So we'll see that it'll start to create a lot of different assets here. So created this test program, this test clone. Okay, so now let's go and check the activity history here. So the request campaign should have been called for this lead. We can see that it happened here on March 6th. And then it's saying we created these following 5 assets while testing. Do you want to delete all 5 of these assets? So I'm going to say yes, and then we'll see them all be deleted here. Wow, that was rapid. They're all already deleted by the time I switched screen. So we can see it deleted all 5 of the test assets here. So that's very smooth and efficient. And if we were to run, if we were to run this again, and we were to say do all the full tests, we wouldn't have to enter any of this information again because it's all saved. So just to show you what that looks like, if we go, let's do the full tests, it's just going to run through all the retests very quickly. And then afterwards, the only thing it's going to ask me is for the permission to run the schedule batch campaign and the request campaign. So we can see here it's loading the values from, so it's already moved on to the write tests. And we can see it's loading the values from the config file, which is this file I have open up here. We can see all the test values being stored for future use. So it loaded all of these because it didn't need to ask us the questions, which is great. And then again, it's asking me to schedule the batch campaign. It's asking me to do the request campaign. And then it's going to go through and create the rest of these assets. And then let's see if I can be quicker this time. If I go yes, we'll see it delete them one by one, which is very cool. Okay, so now that we've tested our Marketo functions.py, we know that each of these Marketo functions works and we can authenticate successfully. The next part is we need to be able to call all of these Marketo functions through our MCP server. So just to show you what I mean by that, we know that this part works over here where we know we're able to make API requests to all. We know we're able to use our Marketo functions to make all the necessary API requests. The next thing we need to do is we need to see if we can make all these tool calls through the MCP server to make the API requests. So to test that out, we've got the test MCP server.py. So the way we test this out is we need to have our MCP server running in one of the windows. So we can either have MCP server or MCP server auth running. So let's just say I'm going to run just the MCP server.py. I need this running in one window. So this is running on local port 8000. So now if I want to run my test MCP server.py, it's going to go through all of the tool calls here and make each of these tool calls. So it's going to send each of the tool call requests to local port 8000 to test out our MCP server. So let's test this out. We're going to run this in a dedicated terminal and we get the exact same options as before: read only, write only, and then the full tests. But this time, because we have our test config, we don't need to enter anything. So I'm just going to do the full test right away. So let's go 3. So now each of these tool calls that it's making, it's sending the tool call request to local port 8000 here. And then once this MCP server running locally receives the tool request, it's then calling the corresponding Marketo function to action. It's then calling the corresponding Marketo function to do the necessary action in Marketo. So we can see it's doing all of them here. Is it onto the create tests yet? It's actually probably going to ask me at some point. Yeah, do I want to schedule the batch campaign to run? I can say yes. Trigger campaign, yes. So created both of these. And now it's asking me, do I want to delete the assets? So let's say yes. And then go over here. We can see them all be deleted. Okay, cleanup complete. So let's see. All 38 of the write tests passed. And all 24 of the read tests passed. So now we've successfully tested out that we can send tool call requests to our MCP server, and it can translate those tool call requests successfully into Marketo API requests. So we've done the two parts of our testing now. We're over here. We first tested that our Marketo functions work, and then once we've tested they work, we've then tested the translation from MCP tool call request to Marketo function to Marketo API request. So that was the second part of the testing that we just did here. So now that we've tested out our existing functions, let's take a look at how we can potentially modify or add new functions. So the first thing you need to do is go to the Marketo API docs and see if and look for the API request for the action you want to carry out. So if you want to, let's say, merge leads, you go to the Marketo lead database, and then you'd go to leads, and then you'd go to merge leads. So that's one way to do it. Or you could just give your AI agent or LLM, give them these docs and explain what you're trying to achieve, and ask it if there's a Marketo API request to carry out the action you want. So as I said, for the merge leads examples, that will lead you to this particular endpoint. And then once you know the API request that you want to add to the Marketo MCP server, you can then ask your AI agent to build that in. So the example I'm going to use is actually an example to clone an email. So if we go to the Marketo API docs, we can see what's needed. So I'm going to pass this. So let me go back to my AI assistant. Visit this web page and set up a new MCP tool for cloning an email. So I'm going to let this run for a minute. It's going to want to visit the web page, and then once it's visited the web page, it's going to start first building the Marketo function. And then once it's built the Marketo function, it's then going to add a tool call to both of these scripts so that the MCP server can reference the Marketo function that we just created. So I'll pause the video here while it's doing some thinking. So we can see it's asking me for permission to make the modification to Marketo functions to add the clone email function. So I'm going to accept this. And now once we've added the clone email function to Marketo functions, we then need to create the corresponding tool call in MCP server. So that's what it's asking me to do. So I'm going to say, yeah, so you can see it wants to add the tool call for cloning email now. So let's go yes. And then it's going to add it to MCP Server auth.py as well. Okay, it didn't do that by default, but we can say, please add the same tool to MCP Server auth.py. And we can see that it's going to add the same tool call to MCP Server auth.py, so I'll accept that. And then if we want to test this out, we can say, please modify the two test scripts to add the clone email test. So we can see it's adding it to the test Marketo functions first. It's adding in the test for that. And then it's going to add it to the test MCP server.py. So that means the next time we run any of these tests, so let's just do this quickly. Okay, I'll accept that change. So created assets. So we're also going to create an email asset now when we clone the email. So that's why it's making this modification too. So let's go yes. And then I'll save you from the rest of these modifications because they're not that important, but basically it's doing all the necessary modifications to add the email test in. I'm just going to say yes, allow all edits during the session. So it should speed through the rest of those edits by itself. Okay, so we can see that Claude finished. So we can see it clones the email. It just gave me a little bit of an error. Well, not an error, a warning to say that we don't yet have a tool call for deleting emails. So if we do run the test, it won't be able to delete the cloned email that was created. But we could also ask Claude to add a Marketo function and tool call for deleting emails. But I won't do that here. Again, this video is already 50 minutes long, so I'll save you guys from that. But again, there's no reason we can't ask Claude to also create the delete email function and tool, and then the cleanup for the tests will be 100%. So that's how we can add a new tool call to our MCP servers. And similarly, if you want to make changes to any of these or remove any of these, you can either do that manually if you want, or you can just ask your AI assistant to remove certain tool calls. Like you could delete this and then it will no longer be available, or you could ask it to modify those tool calls on your behalf. Okay, so now that we've gone through testing and we've also gone through how to add new tool calls, but also modify or remove existing tool calls, it's time to talk about hosting this. And the reason we want to host this is because when we use Ngrok to expose the Marketo MCP server to the internet, this is not a long-term solution. And the reason for this is because if your laptop gets turned off, the MCP server running locally on your laptop dies. So any AI agent trying to access the local port on your laptop through Ngrok will fail. Or if your laptop loses connection to the internet, then no AI agent will be able to access the Marketo MCP either. So I think it's just helpful here for me to go back to this. So if your MCP server, basically your laptop, if your laptop dies, then your AI agent won't be able to access the MCP server or your Marketo tools. And similarly, if your connection to the internet dies, then your MCP server on your laptop is also cut off from the AI agent. And also, if you're using the free version of Ngrok, each time you restart Ngrok, you'll be given a different forwarding URL, which you'll have to update in all the places that you're referencing the MCP. So where's Ngrok? We had it running somewhere. I'll just start a new terminal. So each time you restart Ngrok, this URL changes. So that means if you restart, you have to copy this new URL and then go and update it everywhere you're using it. You'd have to update it here. You'd have to update it in your Claude connector. And basically, yeah, everywhere you're using it. So that's just a bit of a pain. So that's why I recommend once you've done your testing, it's then time to deploy it. And the place I recommend for that is Replit, because it connects to GitHub. So it's easy to sync from your laptop to GitHub and then sync from GitHub to Replit. And then as I showed you at the very start of this video, it just takes a few clicks in order to deploy that code template or that code repository from GitHub so that it's live and accessible on the public internet. And as I showed you guys, I have this Replit template available for you to clone and get started. And as I showed you, all you have to do is enter your Marketo API credentials in the Replit secrets. And then if you intend on using the MCP server auth, then you will also need to set your MCP API key in the secrets. So let's go back here. So if you do intend on using the authenticated MCP server, then you'll just need to enter your API key for that here as well. And if we go to our settings, if we go manage, no, it's not that. Overview, adjust settings. So at the moment, if we look at our settings here, it's running the unauthenticated MCP server. So if you do want to run the authenticated one instead, then you just need to change this to be MCP Server auth.py, and also make sure you've got this MCP API key set correctly. So that's why I recommend once you've done your testing and you know it's working, that's when you need to go to Replit and deploy it. And if you're struggling, as I mentioned before, with all the stuff I've gone through with virtual environments, installing the libraries, working with an LLM to make changes to the code to add new tools, there is the Python for RevOps course. And in lesson 5, I go through deploying your code to Replit, and I go through the differences between an auto scale versus a reserved virtual machine when you're deploying. The default in Replit is, if we look at the settings here, if we go to manage, the default is where? Okay, well, give me a second. Adjust settings, web server, production. Yeah, basically, oh, this is a reserved VM actually. And it costs $20 per month, but the other options, sorry, I paused the video there because I was trying to show you what the other deployment options are. So the deployment type, you can either have a reserved virtual machine, you can have auto scale. It'll either be one of these two options when you're deploying your Marketo MCP server to Replit. And if you can afford the $20 per month, then a reserved virtual machine is better, but you can also set it to auto scale if you want to try and save a bit of money. But if you want to understand the implications of choosing either of these two, then check out the Python for RevOps course. Again, this is 56 minutes here and I don't have time to go into all of that. But now that we've gone into Replit, I just want to finish by kind of going through those use cases we went through at the start of the video. We already went through the Slack MCP agent, and if you want more details on how to set up the listener server to forward the messages between the Slack user and our AI agent, then check out lesson 5 of the AI for RevOps course, because in lesson number 5, I go through exactly how to build this RevOps AI Slack agent, which has access to Marketo, Salesforce, Gmail, and Slack, and the bot will allow users to ask questions about a lead, send emails to the lead, and also update Salesforce to do things like assign the lead to a particular salesperson. So if you're very interested in this use case, then check out the AI for RevOps course. And this course will also teach you how to build an ICP scoring agent, or if you're interested in doing some other things that I'll mention later on, like if you want to build agents for merging duplicates or lead routing or MQL or ICP scoring, then the AI for RevOps course will give you a great foundation for doing all of that. Then the next use case I want to show you more detail is setting up your Marketo MCP with Claude Desktop. So you can download Claude Desktop here, but then the way we're going to set this up is if we go to Claude and we click down here and we go to settings and we go to connectors. So I'm going to delete this. I'm going to remove this one for the moment. So we need to make sure that, let's go back here. We've got our MCP server running. Okay, so we don't currently have an MCP server running. Oh no, we do. So we've got it running on port 8000. So I'm going to copy this Ngrok URL. And then we're going to go add custom connector. We're going to put the /MCP at the end. We're going to call this Marketo MCP. And we're going to go, it's not letting me add it. Oh, I put them in the wrong place. Sorry. So that's the URL. The name is Marketo MCP. And you might be wondering why we're not using authentication when we're using Claude. And the reason for that is because Claude only allows authentication using OAuth 2.0. And I tried to set this up, but it was actually very difficult and I couldn't get it to work. But the exposure here is minimal because you're just using it locally on your laptop, and don't publicize this URL to anyone. And also the next time you restart Ngrok, this URL will change. So if you do have this, don't share this, because anyone who has this URL will be able to access your Marketo instance while you're running the MCP server locally on your laptop. But as I mentioned, the next time you restart Ngrok, this URL will change. So if it does get exposed, simply restart Ngrok and you'll be good. But that's why we have to go with the unauthenticated version What I mean by that is that's why we have to use MCP Server.py, the unauthenticated one, because Claude only accepts OAuth 2.0 and I couldn't get it to work. So that's why we're using the unauthenticated one here. And then when you're configuring the steps here, you can blanket these to always allow. So the AI agent never needs permission before calling a tool. Needs approval means it will always ask you before carrying out a tool action. Blocked will mean it can call none of them. Or you can do custom. So for example, you could allow all the read activities like browsing emails and browsing folders to be always allow. But then obviously when you want to clone a program, you might make that be needs approval, creating a program, creating a smart campaign, or there might be some ones that you want to block. So you can configure it like that. And then when you're ready to use it, you can go over to your chat window, create a new one, and then just make sure you have your connector enabled, which it is. And then you can just ask it, please find the ID for so it's doing the get lead by email request, and then it returns the ID. So that's how you can connect Claude Desktop to your Marketo MCP so you can create a personal Marketo assistant. And one way you can use it, just to get the gears turning to show you what's possible, is you can talk to Claude about how you set up your webinar and email programs at your company, like what template program it should clone. Tell Claude to save this information, and then the next time you have a webinar or email program that needs to be built, give Claude the webinar or email program brief in the form of a document and ask it to build the webinar or email program for you, and then sit back and be amazed. Obviously, the first time you try this, it might not work, but that just means you have to give Claude feedback and let him know what he did well, and then let him know what he needs to do differently the next time, and then ask him to save this information. So then the next time you get a webinar or email program brief, its performance will be better. So this way you can build a personal Marketo assistant to help with campaign ops, lead management, and data extraction and analysis. And then the final use case that I showed you guys earlier on is building an agent in the OpenAI playground. So as we saw before, if we go back here, if we go to create, we enter our URL, we call it Marketo MCP. And in this case, we're not using the authenticated one, but we can actually change that. So I'll show you here. Currently, this Ngrok is forwarding to this MCP Server.py that is running here. But I'm actually going to, so we can see it connects successfully here, but I'm going to go back for a second because let's turn this off and let's run the MCP server auth.py. Okay, so that's running on port 8000 now, and Ngrok is going to forward everything that comes into this URL to port 8000, which is now going to go to MCP server auth.py. So we can see if we try, let's go Marketo MCP. If we try and set this to none, we'll get an error message here saying we don't have the necessary permissions. Well, that should have given us an error message. Which one is running? Yeah, I got a 401 unauthorized. Yeah, so now it's saying unable to load tools. So hold on, let's redo that. Maybe there's just some sort of lag, but let's go Marketo MCP, let's go to none, connect. So it's saying unable to load tools here. And we can see if we go to our MCP server here, so we're getting this is the Ngrok, we're getting a 401 unauthorized. And yeah, we can see all the failed attempts coming in here because OpenAI is not specifying the necessary permission. So now if we go back and we do this again, Marketo MCP, and yes, it's access token API key. In my case, I set a very simple password for now, and I go connect. Now we can access all the MCP tool calls, and if we go here, we can see all the successful responses now that we've entered the token or the API key. And as I showed you before, you can set up something like an ICP scoring agent, which can do web search, and it can also access all the information you have about a lead in Marketo, such as their activity history and all the information such as the number of employees at their company, the industry their company is in, how much funding or revenue their company generates, and then it can use that to make a decision on whether this person and their company matches your ICP. So that's just one agent you can build in OpenAI with your Marketo MCP, but you could also build one that does duplicate merging or lead routing. And to give you guys some inspiration, I've got two blog posts. One is the Marketo Lead Scoring Bible, which teaches you how to build activity and also fit scoring. So what I mean by fit scoring is how well the lead and their company matches your ICP, and then the activity scoring scores how engaged they are, and you can combine both of these, the activity and the fit, to build an MQL mechanism. So I share that here in a blog post, but you can look at that and see ways you could bring AI intelligence into your MQL scoring or your lead scoring. And then similarly, this Zap goes through how you can merge automatically using Zapier. So every time you get duplicates in Marketo, a Zap process runs to merge them according to your own custom rules. So if one says lead source is organic and the other says lead source is paid search, you can prioritize the paid search value. And again, this blog post uses Python rules or uses Python code to set up those custom rules, but you could also build an AI agent that can intelligently look at the fields on both leads and then choose the values which should be the winning field values for the merged lead. So you can use an AI agent to do that intelligent merging. So those are just two examples to get you thinking about what's possible. And now here we are. I know the whole title of the video is Marketo MCP in 15, so you're probably wondering, if you skip to the end, why it's an hour and 10 minutes long, but we were able to get this up and running in 15 minutes because the plug and play template literally just requires a few clicks in Replit to get running, and then you can start using it. Then you can start using it in Claude or OpenAI. And then we went through how we set up our MCP server, how to test it thoroughly, and how to add new tools to it. So now you should be able to use it for all the different use cases we went through, like building a Slack AI agent, using it as your personal assistant in Claude, or if you want to build AI agents for your revenue operations workflows. And if you need help building any of those AI agents, or you're very interested in building the Slack MQL agent that I showed earlier on, then check out the AI for RevOps course, because it will teach you how to build AI agents for all those different use cases that I mentioned. Okay, thanks for bearing with me for that hour and 10 minutes. And the last thing I'll say is, if you liked the video, please give it a thumbs up and leave a comment. Those will help the video rank higher and kind of reward me for all this hard work. Obviously recording this video took an hour and 10 minutes, but all the prep to build the Marketo MCP server and then write the blog posts has taken me all my evenings and some time over the weekend for the past 2 weeks. So I really appreciate all the support, and you can support me in return by sharing this video with people you think would find it useful. All right, thanks. I'll see you later.